You're listening to Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis. Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis is brought to you by...
You know, there are few relationships more solid than the bond between a man and his barber. For years, I've gotten my cut with Gene the Barber. Gene has been cutting my hair for more than 20 years. Call him directly at 240-687-7253 and make an appointment. Gene the Barber, 240-687-7253.
A Squared Home and Office Solutions is the go-to source for home or office network and audiovisual solutions. We can help with smart home integration, wireless networking, media rooms, security systems, and more. We will link technology to your lifestyle seamlessly. Visit homeandofficesolutions.com for more info.
You're listening to Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis. Here's your host, Kurtis Cross.
Welcome to Conversations with Kurtis. I am your host, Kurtis Cross, and with me, as always, is no one. I'm in the studio by myself. I'm going to introduce our guest in just a moment. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to get into a great conversation, but first, I want to thank our sponsors, Gene the Barber and A Squared Home and Office Solutions. Be sure to connect with me socially at Kurtis Talks on Instagram and Twitter and www.kurtistalks.com. Also, take a listen to our other podcasts, Crosstalk, The Kurtis and Paula Show, a lifestyle, love, marriage, and parenthood podcast. You'll hear about the day-to-day life of me and Paula. Take It to You with Turner and O'Neill, a local and national sports podcast hosted by me, along with coaches Steve Turner and Casey O'Neill. Ramblin' Teachers is a local teacher talk podcast hosted by a few friends of the Crosstalk family. The Midnight Truck Stop and 911 Radio, both of these podcasts are hosted by Big T and The Blue Knight. You'll hear stories from truckers, 911 calls, law enforcement officers, and a host of interesting guests. All of these podcasts can be found on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcast content. Now, once again, I want to thank you for listening to Crosstalk Conversations with Kurtis, and I thank you for joining today's conversation. Today, I would like to welcome to the conversation Dr. Erika Michalski. Erika, how's it going?
It's a Friday. How can it be anything but great, right?
Well, this is what I want to know. Last time we talked, it was beautiful outside, and then you had a storm coming in that weekend. You're in Fort Collins. Tell me about the weather today. But first, we are at 77 degrees and breezy here. Tell me about your weather.
Well, that storm came, and it brought with it about 17 inches of snow to my backyard.
Okay.
So it came with a vengeance. And, you know, that's why we love it here in Colorado, because that was spring break for my children. We had 17 inches of snow. But here in Fort Collins, the tricky part about snow is if you don't get more than about 8 inches, it's gone within 24 to 48 hours because the temperature will hit 40s and 50s, which we had last week. So the snow was gone, but it took long enough that my kids got to actually enjoy that time. Today, it's about 40 degrees outside, which for me means I walked my kids to school in flip-flops because 40 degrees, my toes can be out here in Colorado.
Okay. All right. Well, we got, like I said, 77 here. I cannot complain. And Erika, I want to tell people about you. So let's go over your bio a little bit. We're going to get into a great conversation. So, folks, for those who don't know, Dr. Erika Michalski has a robust history providing educational programming and engaging workshops dedicated to empowering participants and cultivating new ideas about professional development. She has also been guiding teams through strategic planning and long-range tactical visioning processes for over a decade. Erika is passionate about creating environments where individuals feel equipped to tackle new challenges as they move forward in personal and professional endeavors. Look, I can read it all. I want to hear from you. Tell me more about what you do. You've got a great backdrop. I love the painting there. And talk to me about the wild and crazy life of Dr. Michalski and what you're all about.
Sure. You know, it's funny. The life that I have now and the things that bring me joy now are directly by tangential routes connected to where I started in life. And my backdrop may look like I was a preschool teacher because I used to be one. So there you go. It's funny because my clients now, as I do professional development, I design curriculum for HR departments. So if you want to build your team, you can have a leadership retreat, and lots of people do that. But sometimes folks are willing to explore what it means to invest over a longer period and to really invite their staff or their volunteers. I work with nonprofits who do development for their volunteers to grow over more than just a weekend.
Sure.
But a lot of what makes me successful in that space made me successful as a preschool teacher because I'm exactly who I am. And in the preschool space, you got to show up every day as who that child is expecting. Because for some of the kids that I was working with at that time, 15 years ago, I represented stability for them. So authenticity in a preschool teacher is huge, because if you aren't who they expect, it can really throw a child off for that whole day. What I've seen is there are a lot of folks who haven't figured out that matters not just when you're a child, but that matters across your lifespan. That matters as a parent, that matters as a partner, but that matters as a boss or a teammate or a volunteer. People invite you to be a part of their team, or they offer you a job, or they request your support because of who you are. So if you show up as a different version, then they're not getting what they expected, and it becomes harder on you to be a version of something you're not.
So talk to me about that authenticity. You know, you and I, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
That word came up more than once. And thank you for doing what you did in the preschool classroom. Those kids, some of those kids, you are the only stability they get. I have a life full of educators. So from my mother to my grandmother, to my mother-in-law, to my wife, to my aunts and cousins, I know how important it is to be that person, that stability. If, you know, I don't spend a lot of time with all these podcasts talking about the COVID effect and all of that, but a lot of those kids missed that stability when they were not in the school. You walk your kids to school today, which means they're going. That's a piece of stability. Not that they lack for that probably in your presence, but it's just, I coached high school and college basketball for a while. And one thing that I could not get across to my players sometimes is that in the summertime, I would have summer leagues and they would go play for another coach, because sometimes they have to hear it from a different voice. Sure. So your kids are getting that stability at home and in the classroom. I'm so glad they're doing that. But let's get back to that passion for authenticity. That comes up with you a lot. Yes. So please avail our listeners and our viewers of what that means to you.
Sure. Authenticity is, for me, is the peak of how we show up. And it comes up a lot. I love that word so much that's what I named my company, Strategically Authentic. That was not an accident. Right. I believe that most people make their life 1 to 2 levels harder by trying to replicate someone else's example. You can take lessons from other people. You can admire other people. But the most important piece is to think about what that means for me and how I show up to have the same impact. Because what I found over years of work and research, when I hear that decade piece in my bio, I'm reminded that I'm no spring chicken anymore. The college students remind me of that when I show up on campus, because some of them were born when I started college. But when you take that lens of authenticity and you lead with an authentic foot, what you're doing is you're saying, I respect that person because of the impact that they're having. I respect that person because of the impact they're having on their community or their staff or their family, whatever it is. And instead of trying to be that person and use the words that they use or use the mannerisms that they use or dress like they do, you take a step and you say, what is the impact that I want to have? And how do I have that impact to the degree that the other person is? So you can look at great leaders and say, I want to have that impact, but I'm not an extrovert, for example. So there are a lot of really loud, bold individuals, and you may see a loud, bold individual and love what they're doing, and then you try to do that. But if you are not a loud, bold individual, if red lipstick and big earrings are not your jam, right, it's never going to work. And you begin to add more work to yourself, and you begin to expend mental energy thinking about, okay, so today I'm going into this meeting and I respect this other person. How would this other person go into that meeting? No. It's about, how do I show up in that meeting as my authentic self and have that impact and exist with the same confidence and capacity for being a catalyst for change and growth and empowerment to other people that someone else has. Because that's really what it's all about from my perspective.
So I want to dive into, for a quick moment, what the rest of the world sees as a CEO. You see that acronym means something different to you. Talk to me about that. You proudly serve as the CEO, but tell me what that means to you.
I'm the chief encouragement officer. My goal is to believe in you. That's it. Because there are some people, and this is so, I'm glad that we got to have a split second on preschool teaching, because this is anchored in my work as a preschool teacher. This is anchored in my work as a professional working at a Big 12 institution with collegiate athletes who were revenue generating sports. So they were told to be really successful on a field or a court.
Right.
And I worked with them and said, what would happen if you were also successful in the classroom? What would that look like? What could that look like? And so between preschool teaching and working with football players and men's basketball players, I got to serve this role of believing in someone's capacity that they may not have ever recognized in themselves. And for me, that changed the game. Everything I thought I wanted to do with my life changed when I watched what it could do to believe in someone else and to say, hey, I think you can do that, but what else can we do? Where else can we take it? So pouring into other people and serving as the chief encouragement officer, inviting my clients, inviting their teams to elevate the impact that they're having is a perfect dream for me.
Let me ask you this. I'm glad you mentioned Big 12. I'm glad you mentioned the college athletes. How do you see that work being different between male college athletes and female college athletes? The female college athletes, I just happened to mention, didn't know you would go down that road, that I coached high school and college basketball. That was on the women's side.
Right.
And the women's side of collegiate athletics is so underserved.
Absolutely.
And, it bothers me to this day. I don't know if you saw the men's March Madness tournament and what their workout facility was like versus the women's and that sort of thing. What does that work look like for you when you're the chief encouragement officer and getting them to see what does this look like, not on the hardwood, not on the lacrosse field, the field hockey field? How does that differ between the men athletes and the women athletes for you?
One of the things that I noticed is in the academic space, the women were ready to champion themselves.
Okay.
They were ready to believe that they were capable. And a lot of times they came prepared differently.
Okay.
But for my men, some of them had been genuinely spending so much energy on sports since they were 5 and 6 years old, because the dream for them was to get out of whatever circumstances they were in and get to a college scholarship. And so there was so much energy poured into the athletic piece, which I get and is important, that sometimes it took me 4 or 5 sessions with a male athlete to say, you're allowed to also care about school. Some of them didn't feel like that was the point. And so getting to move past that, and honestly, with the women, especially at the time that I was working there and the athletes that I was working with, some of the athletes I was working with on the female side, women's basketball and gymnastics, their dreams weren't professional sports to the same way that the men's were. So the women were ready to build their future. And the men sometimes were just trying to hang on to be eligible for bowl games or to be eligible for big events from an athletic perspective so that they could get seen and scouted. And so that pendulum had to switch and move in a different direction, because a lot of them weren't going to become professional athletes. But if I was working with a freshman male, he sure was confident he was ready to be a pro athlete. And over time, it became clear that maybe it was all right to be interested enough in school to get something out of it, interested enough in the academic piece to grow that way, not just grow on the court or the field or in the pool.
And do we think that, or where's your head when it comes to, so for the female athletes, it was okay to be or to excel in that academic space because the end result wasn't necessarily, or the goal wasn't necessarily the same as the men athletes? Is it because we haven't built a rich enough, end result for the women on the professional athlete side or the professional sports side?
I think so. I think I will tell you, women's basketball has come a long way from the athletes that I was working with in the early 2000s to now.
Sure.
So we as a culture are slowly beginning to champion women and their athletic endeavors, but along with the workout facilities, which I saw, I don't know if you happened to see, but there was some additional coverage about the way the media was covering it. And at one point there were hundreds of photographs of the men's games. And there were, I believe I saw one single women's image on the page. So it isn't just the workout facilities and how they are treated as athletes. It's how they're presented to us as athletes.
Right.
And
you're right.
As having the same value.
It's unfortunately, and it's the case with anything that we have to band together to change. I don't want to ever get numb to that, but it's you start to get numb to it because all the men's games are on prime time and they get all the coverage, like you said. No, I get it. I do understand the dollars and cents behind it. And I understand that as a fan base and a community, we have to do our part because we must support them by showing up in the seats. We must support them by, buying products that are advertised there so the advertisers want to pour more money into it. I do get that. But I'll tell you, you could go to any major university and to get season tickets to a men's basketball season is going to cost you 3 or 4 times what it's going to cost you to go. I literally got season tickets for 4 of us to the University of Maryland women's basketball for maybe like under $200 for an entire season. But it'd be hard.
In Fort Collins, Colorado State University's women's team has been showing up with intense fervor. So we have 2 daughters at my house.
Right.
And my partner and I do everything we can to make sure they see what women are capable of. But so I'm grateful his boss is a woman. And so he leaves every morning to go to work and my kids will shout at him, "Listen to Big Beth." That's his boss. Right. So they know that this woman is a scientist. My partner is a molecular biologist and virologist. So male dominated field.
Right.
And in our household, we talk a lot about not just the idea that you can do anything, but the idea that anybody can do anything. That
Sure.
we need to not just open doors and look at what we're capable of, but look at what can we invite other people to do. And when we notice someone being successful in a space, how do we bolster them and encourage them? Again, that chief encouragement officer, I'm the one in my household who's the chief encouragement officer too. I can't help who I am. I'm authentic. What can I say? So we have talked about, now that the girls are old enough to not go bonkers after 20 minutes of a basketball game, the next academic year, we will be season ticket holders at Colorado State and we will go watch the women. That's how I'm going to introduce my children to collegiate sports, is women and women's sports and what they're doing. There was a conversation a couple of years ago, I want to say maybe 2 years ago, Colorado State was getting a new head coach for their men's team. Okay. And they were entertaining, there were rumors that it was going to be a female head coach. And at that time, Dan and I both said, if our town has a female head coach for a men's basketball team that's, recognized in its conference, we will be at every game we can take our girls to. We love seeing that, but it shouldn't be so hard to find,
It should not be. No. And, and you look at women's college basketball, there are plenty of women coaches, but men have found a way to attempt to dominate that as well. And that's not to say that men are not qualified to do so. I coached women's basketball successfully for 20 plus years. I had the time of my life. I was able to encourage these young ladies. I still talk to many of those young ladies today. And that's just an awesome feeling. But, let's step away from me. So we're planting the roots for who you are, where you've come from. Talk to me about your current projects. What are we working on now that sort of excites us?
Oh man. So my favorite thing that I'm working on right now is this intersection between a couple of research areas that I love. My passion is to convert research into practical application and give people real stuff they can do. I think there are a lot of folks that will tell you about research and then they expect you to figure out what to do with that research. And I try really hard not to be that. So right now I'm taking neuroscience research on satisfaction and what that looks like for an individual, and building programs around how companies, nonprofits, academic institutions, whoever it is, how we can take that neuroscience research around satisfaction and convert it into the development of our people. So how do we create a culture of satisfaction? You got to start with the individual. We have to understand what the science says, but then you get to layer in some of the psychology and positive psychology around cultural dynamics and those sorts of things. And so I'm taking all these areas of research and mashing them all up together into individual programs and large scale, training curriculum on the role of authentic satisfaction and the impact it can have on a culture.
So you and I, we off camera or even prior to today, you and I talked about that neuroscience piece. And I feel like when we did, that kind of excited you as well. Please jump into that.
I love it. So the basics are that there are 4 neurological channels that directly contribute to our sense of satisfaction. This is our sense of feeling value and purpose in our life. And because those are individual neurological channels in our own brain, what it teaches us is chasing external satisfaction is never going to be fulfilling. So it starts with the idea that the work is ours to do. The chase may contribute, but at the end of the day, the work is ours to do. So across those 4 channels, one is the idea of how do you respond to positive emotions? How do you maintain a sense of positivity? What do you do for yourself that creates and maintains when a good thing happens? So when you start off in the morning and you have a great morning, or you have a good breakfast, or you have an easy early morning flight, because I travel a lot. So that's usually the start to a great day, is a smooth flight. How do you sustain that and keep that going and continue to fuel that positive energy fire? So that's one part of satisfaction. And that's logical. Most people say, well, that would make sense. The second is, how do you respond to and move through negative emotions? I think it's really, really important for folks to understand that satisfaction isn't the avoidance of negative things. It's the ability to recognize, process, and move through those things, give negative emotions a space and allow them to exist as they need to. And then how do we take that and move forward? So a lot of times when I talk about that piece of this workshop or these workshops, we talk about when you're having a really great day, making a list of the things that help you have a great day, or the things that you can do to move forward. If you make that list when you're in the middle of a negative place, sometimes you're too far down that negativity rabbit hole and you can't come up with anything. You think, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to, sit in this dark space. And sometimes we need to do that. But when you create that list and you have it available, sometimes you say, man, I'm having a tough time, or I just got off a really terrible phone call, or this client just ended our contract, or, whatever it is. You go to that list and you say, I've got 15 minutes. What's on this list that I can do for 15 minutes? How do I take care of myself? Honor how I feel, but prevent it from moving forward with me. So I love that. I love that idea that you can allow negativity to happen. You just can't allow it to control you. You can respond to it. You can process it. You got to acknowledge it. And then you move forward. So moving forward is about deciding what you carry with you. Moving on, when we talk about, if something happens and people say, I just want to move on. I want to move on from a breakup. Sometimes they want nothing to do with any of the pieces. And so moving on is more of this cutting ties.
Sure.
I think moving forward is about looking at the circumstances, looking at the situation and saying, what are the pieces that I need to take with me to be successful or to continue to have the impact that I'm looking for? And what can I release? And that piece, when folks can recognize they're allowed to release some of those things and they're allowed to invite some of those lessons or even some of those feelings to move forward, it changes that dynamic of control. So those are 2 of the neurological channels that directly contribute to our sense of satisfaction in our day-to-day life and what we're doing. The other 2 are trickier because they're not usually on people's radar and they're a little harder to work at. One is the ability to tune out. For some folks, that might mean meditation. Mm-hmm. And I always admit, this is the hardest one for me because I don't like to be alone with my thoughts all the time. I used to be a yoga instructor. And when I was a yoga instructor, I loved it because I got all the benefits of the workout. But at the end of the class, when you're supposed to do Shavasana and do relaxation, and you're supposed to release into your own mental space, as the instructor, I couldn't do that because I had to watch the clock. I had to be ready for other things. So I got to do all of the yoga without having to be alone with my thoughts. It turns out that's cheating. That's not the point. But I wasn't at a place where I was comfortable, in my own head at that time. But the research tells us being able to focus and tune out allows us to engage differently. And your prefrontal cortex, the front of your brain, that is your thinking brain, right, can only hold about 7 thoughts at a time, give or take 2. So 5 to 9 is your range.
Okay.
If you are using 7 or 8 of those thoughts on all the noise, you're going to get overwhelmed every time. And as soon as we get overwhelmed, we start thinking with our amygdala, which is our emotional brain. So if we can learn to tune out and to focus in. And for some folks, that means structuring their workday when they turn on their email, when they take their phone out of sleep mode. but it's also the messaging that you're getting from other people and deciding whether or not that matters to you, whether or not that has a purpose for you. And again, that's tied to that authenticity piece that I love so much. People say a lot about who I am and whether or not they think I'm real. I am a 37-year-old woman who still loves to cheerlead. That's literally what I do. You can see in the back of my office, I've got pom-poms in my office. I love to cheer for and encourage other people. And my goal is to see other people successful. And I know that that means people might not know who I am in the process. And that's not what it's about for me. And there are some folks that don't think that's possible, that you can really just believe in the success of other people and let go of your own sort of pieces. But as I've moved through my own growth, the idea of focusing in and tuning out noise and thinking about, sometimes it's as simple as my own breath, that's a game changer. And there are a lot of folks that think meditation is sitting cross-legged on a mountainside. There are a lot of different ways that you can meditate or focus or become calm. And that's really what it's about. And I am a high energy extrovert who drinks only water. Well, that's not true anymore. I'm now 37. I drink a little bit of coffee in the morning.
There you go.
But most of my life is not caffeine based. My energy is from being excited to be above ground. And so there are times when all of that energy forces me in a lot of different directions, and I have to decide how to ground myself. And that grounding is what really helps a lot of folks deepen their sense of satisfaction. When you are grounded, when you are more present and less ping-pongy, you can experience pieces that you otherwise would miss. So that piece is another channel, and the ability to just exist where you are, tune into where you are, block out all that other stuff. You're allowed to get to it later. I mean, it's hard to ignore the noise forever, but being able to find a time in your day where you look at your own space and give that a moment is a game changer. And then the last channel is probably my favorite.
Okay.
It's the idea that we deepen our sense of satisfaction as individuals when we intentionally choose to serve the people around us without expecting recognition.
So tough to do, right?
Right. Because social media invites us to tell everyone every time we do a good thing.
Right. And we're looking for those likes, right?
Yeah, looking for a like, or we're looking to be the 40 under 40, and part of that is service. So everyone in my community or whoever is part of that publication in my town has to know all the ways that I'm serving. It's okay to humbly serve because you're a human and you're near someone who needs serving. That's it. You exist and the opportunity presents itself, and you can serve a person. You can support your community without everything being publicized. And that piece of satisfaction comes from the intrinsic value we start to cultivate in our sense of self and our existence about investing in our community. You know, my dad used to talk about how important it was to pay your civic rent. And I didn't get it at the time because I was little. But as I got older and I had opportunities in college to be in different forms of service, and I started to realize that I didn't just like it when I got credit. I liked it when someone else's life was easier, better. Someone felt stronger, someone felt more capable. So that channel for me is a little bit of magic because it's that permission to love someone just because they exist and not because the internet will tell you did a good job.
So pay your civic rent. I love that. I have something, it's not mine, but you know, service to others is the rent we have to pay for being here on earth. It really is. Look, you did me a disservice. I've written so many notes here. I don't know what to get to next, but that's good. One thing that is on my mind, who champions your encouragement efforts? Now, who do you turn to?
I am blessed to be married to a person who believes I can genuinely do anything. Okay. I have a husband who, anytime I say, hey, I have this idea, I need someone to tell me how crazy it is. Because I love thinking so far outside the box, you can't see it anymore. That's where I'm most successful because my mind is very strategic, but from a place of creativity. And so it isn't just logical. And he's a scientist, so he follows very clean lines.
Sure.
And he picked a person who doesn't even have lines. I'm just all over the place. So being able to say, this is what I think I can do. He loves hearing me talk about what I think I can do. And he believes in my ability to make other people's lives better. And he will tell me that. He will come hear me give a keynote and say, man, those people needed you today and you showed up as you. And so he knows how important this authenticity piece is for me, and highlights when I've had an impact, or shares with me, hey, you said this thing yesterday and I just need you to know. That really helped me out. And I have a couple of key people in my social network who also want to hear what I'm up to and say, oh, I might be able to use that for my team. And so I'm really grateful that I have a couple of incredible adult friends who believe in my passion and who love me when I'm loud, and who make sure on the days when I have a little bit of imposter syndrome, which I do have. I'm going to be honest. There are some times when I think, man, I have this big project and this client has invited me to do something that is a little bit bigger than I've done before. And I'm not sure. And even if it's just for a moment, I know who I can call when I say, hey, I know I can do this, but in this moment, I'm overwhelmed by it. And I have a couple of folks who will say, here are the 3 things that you need to remember that you've done in the past, or here's who you are, and here's who you've been for me, and here's who you've shown up as. And I know you can show up for them too. So I'm very fortunate in that regard.
It's fascinating because you and I have spoken before today, of course, but I didn't realize where we are aligned in terms of, I have a couple of people that I turn to and I'm like, look, for every 10 ideas I have, 2 or 3 of them might work. I need you to tell me why this won't work. And I put some crazy stuff out there. Fortunately, I haven't fallen too hard, but we've had some failures. And of course, I'm, again, all the cliche terms, I think failure is where the learning really is. I mean, we found out how not to do it that way. So no, I know exactly what it's like. I do my water. I do my, 1 cup of coffee in the morning, or it's a little bit bigger than 1 cup, but so it's water for me, and that's what drives me. And I think it's rare that you find someone who will share that passion you have for seeing others succeed, enjoying their success. It's a part of maturity. This is not me 20 years ago. This is me, for the past 10 or 15 years. It comes with marriage. It comes with maturity. It comes with children, having to care about something outside of yourself and their genuine success. So you have the village that will, I guess they'll center you and ground you and refocus you when things are a little bit haywire. So that's good to have. Why do you think,
though? The secret there is too.
Well, tell me.
There are always people who want to know what you're up to, right?
Sure.
But there are only a few that want to ask, how can I support you? So
Sure.
Find the people that say, what does it look like for me to support you in this moment? Instead of deciding what you need, asking how they can show up for you. So there are plenty of people in my life that are excited to hear about my projects or those kinds of things and want to know, if we can collaborate. I love a good collaboration. So there are folks who want to know what I'm up to so that we can collaborate. But everybody needs to find a couple of folks whose response to your energy is, how do I support that? Because that's a different question, and not everybody will ask that.
No, you're absolutely right. And some folks, maybe they don't know how to, and that's fine. And we have to know that all our energy is not for everyone. So we do need people in our life who can meet us in those spaces and who can be, like you said, that supplemental piece, that complementary piece, so that we can get where we need to go. And where, collaborations are great. Absolutely. But I think you also know that collaborations are often, self-serving for one or the other, or weighted in a way that, is not, mutually beneficial. So I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm glad for our listeners and our viewers to hear that as well. So we're referencing cheerleading. Tell me why. Why do we want to be a cheerleader so much?
I love it. I was a cheerleader in high school. I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to coach a collegiate cheerleading team for a little bit. I love the idea that you can say to someone who's working so hard, I believe you can do even more. And I love the idea that you can believe in them before they do anything, because that's really, so high school cheerleading, at least where I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. This is going to sound so wild that this is what I tie my career to, but here we are. We made locker signs the day before a game, any game. When I was a wrestling cheerleader, any wrestling meet. When I was a basketball cheerleader, any basketball game. So you make a locker sign. You as a cheerleader go in early before school starts, the day of the game, and you post it on someone's locker. And that sign says, I got your back. And for whatever reason, I love that. I mean, I love cheerleading. I loved that part, but I love this visual representation that someone is in your corner. And so I put a lot of energy into my cheerleading signs. I loved spending time watching TV or whatever on Thursday night, making these glitter loaded, glue covered. Some mornings they would still be wet, so I'd have to sit with a hairdryer, dry them, locker signs, and doing something so over the top to say, hey, when you're out on that court, no matter what's happening, even if you are not playing your best game, I got your back, and I'm here to believe that you can keep going. What's funny is, a few months ago, the husband of one of the cheerleaders who I was assigned, or one of the basketball players who I was assigned to as a cheerleader, who I made signs for 2 years, and I loved it, and I was so passionate about it. And when I would cheer, her mom would cheer for me in the stands as a cheerleader because I was cheering for her daughter on the court. Right. He reached out to me, and I'd never met him, and he said, you don't know me, but my wife still talks about your locker signs, and her birthday is coming up. Would you mind making some of those types of signs and mailing them to me so I can put them up on her birthday? And I did it instantly. It was my favorite project. So I made locker signs for an adult because the locker sign represents a tangible reminder that you can do more. And we as a culture, so I referenced the pom-poms behind me. We know those pom-poms represent cheerleading. And to some people that means NFL cheerleaders and their attire and whatever. And I get that, and that's fine. And I recognize that when I choose cheerleading as part of my brand, some of that expectation comes to it. And I will tell you, I wear regular clothes. I've had 2 children, and one of them was a 10-pound baby. My body does not want to be in those things anymore. But the idea that on your best day, I want to celebrate with you. And on your worst day, I want to remind you who you are. That's the point of cheerleading to me. Now, the point of cheerleading to some high school students may be a little different. I recognize that not everyone comes to the table with that mindset, but I loved the idea that you're supporting someone else. And the other piece for me is I was a base. We were an all-female squad, and somebody had to be strong enough to lift everybody else. And I was strong enough to send women flying through the air. So I got to provide support for flyers who are usually short and thin. And I was 5'8" as a 14-year-old. So that was never going to be my role. But they had big dreams, and they wanted to go high in the air and do these tricks, but they needed somebody who could get them there. And I loved that I was that person. So now it makes complete sense that that's how I would view myself in my professional life. If you think about what I've said for our time together, all of it works together.
Sure.
So I
absolutely. And, and people don't, I think people miss sometimes, it's very important that we acknowledge our team, that we acknowledge our staff, we acknowledge all the pieces that go together. I'm in front of a microphone a lot. I address groups all the time. I produce weddings and blah, 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 blah. But there's someone in the warehouse who has to get everything together. There's someone who has to type this up and take care of this. And those support pieces, and even from a physical standpoint, you were a support piece. Now you're a support piece. It looks a little bit different now. Tell me, strategically authentic. Who connects with you? Why do they connect with you? What are they seeking from you? How do you help?
Sometimes it's an individual who's trying to figure out what their leadership's going to look like. I've had clients who want individual coaching, and they want individual support as they learn. If they've maybe moved up a ladder because they've been successful in an area of their life, and now they're leading other people to help them be successful, but they've never been cultivated to be a supervisor. They're good at a thing, and now they're above a bunch of people doing that thing, and they're not quite sure. So sometimes it's folks who want some individual support. They want to understand what it looks like for them to have the type of impact and how they can grow. Sometimes it's folks who want to build their team. Sometimes it's folks who need help with project management. Maybe they're looking at more projects than they've ever had, or things are just changing. And that's an area that I specialize in, is how do you do project management as an individual and as a team in a way that is the most effective without draining you or your team. Folks who want to do strategic planning, those are my people. Folks who want to grow in their sense of self, no matter what they're doing. Those are the people who need that reminder of what authenticity can be. Some of the clients that I work with are doing projects helping folks think about their own definition of success. And that's one of my favorite keynotes, is the authentic definition of success, and pursuing that rather than the cultural norm definition of success. Because for me, success isn't owning a boat and a plane and 6 houses and all of those things, but the world keeps trying to tell me that's what I should be chasing. For me, success is, it's and that's okay. If that is someone else's definition of success and I'm working with them, I will do everything I can to get them there. But for me, it's knowing that on Friday afternoon, I turn off my email, and I'm a mom, and it's Friday pizza and movie night, and I'm not thinking about a single client project in that moment. That's success to me, that balance and finding a way to align personal success and professional success so that you don't deplete your resources too much on one side or the other. So anyone who's looking to really tailor their approach to life through their own lens of authenticity, whether it's through strategic planning for a team or through individual coaching, those are the folks that I'm really here to support.
Strategically authentic. What's next?
I'm working on a couple of exciting collaborations. I'm working on helping a private business go public, which is a huge endeavor, and that involves a lot of document reading and a lot of conversations with attorneys. So working on a couple of those projects, working in the evolution of businesses and how it relates to the evolution of the human gene and DNA. So again, it helps that I'm married to a scientist, because I get these ideas about science. I loved science, but I'm a social scientist, so I didn't spend a ton of time in biology classrooms and chemistry classrooms and all those things. But I have been inspired by a couple of texts that I've read recently, and looking at the evolution of humans. If you look at the human genetics and you look at the human DNA and cells, there are some parts of us that have been around since the beginning. And there are some parts that have perpetually needed to evolve. And so taking those ideas and converting that into understanding from a business perspective, what about your business needs to stay consistent, and what needs to evolve, and how can I help you move through that evolution? So that's sort of the next layer. After I build this neuroscience piece, I'm going to move into that space as well, and grow my content around the biology of business.
Erika, we are strategically authentic. Please tell our viewers, our listeners, how they can connect with you, Dr. Erika Michalski.
The best way to find me right now is on Instagram. That's where you'll get some great content as well. I have no problem sharing content with people. I think we're all in this together. And, you know, the old saying, when the tide rises, when one ship rises, we all rise, right? So if we all choose to invest in each other, why wouldn't we? So you'll also find my authentic self. I've started doing reels, which I think is hysterical, because there are people that do really beautiful produced reels, and they're like 15 seconds or 20 seconds long, and that's what they want to do, and that's their authentic self showing up, and that is great. Mine are done by my phone, propped up against some books. Sometimes my dog makes an accidental appearance, but I believe in the information that I'm sharing. So if you go to Consultant Barbie, at Consultant Barbie, that is where we didn't have time to talk about my love of Barbie, but that's a whole different story. She could do anything, and no one told her no.
Right.
At a time when we were telling women no a lot, this woman could do anything. So anyhow, if you go to at Consultant Barbie on Instagram, you'll find me, you'll find what I'm up to, you'll see information about what's coming. I'm in the process of building a new website with a graphic designer who's tremendous and who loves to figure out how to turn my passion and my words and my chaos into content. So she's amazing. And so that should be launched here sometime in the second quarter, and then folks can find me there as well.
You know, it's a rising tide raises all boats. I love it. You just spoke to it. I heard that for the first time a few years ago. A very good friend of mine, Sean Parker, who's in the Midwest, he works in the NBA, mentioned that to me. I hadn't heard it before he said it, and of course now I hear it all the time. Erika, you talked about Barbie. This is what you owe me now. We got to do this again sometime, right?
It's a date. You tell me when and I'll show up. I promise.
Fort Collins, Colorado. I got that right? Fort Collins, right?
Fort Collins.
Erika, thanks for joining the conversation. taking the time to chat with me today. Hang on a minute. I'm going to close out the show. I'm going to join you backstage. We want to thank you for joining us, but I'll be just backstage with you in a moment. That will do it for today's episode of Conversations with Kurtis. Connect with me socially at Kurtis Talks on Instagram and Twitter at www.kurtistalks.com as well. Remember, it's Kurtis with a K, Kurtis Talks. You can also email me with podcast ideas if you would like to be a guest or know of someone whose story needs to be told, who I shall welcome to this table. Just send an email to kurtisandpaula@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out our podcast family, The Kurtis and Paula Show, Take It to You with Turner and O'Neill, Ramblin' Teachers, and of course, The Midnight Truck Stop and 911 Radio, hosted by Big Tony and the Blue Knight. You'll find our family of podcasts just about anywhere you get your podcast content. Thanks for joining the conversation today, ladies and gentlemen. Feel free to spread the word. And as always, thank you, Khadijah. I'll see you next time.
Crosstalk, Conversations with Kurtis can be heard on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Music, and just about anywhere podcasts can be found.
You know, there are few relationships more solid than the bond between a man and his barber. For years, I've gotten my cut with Gene the Barber. Gene has been cutting my hair for more than 20 years. Call him directly at 240-687-7253 and make an appointment. Gene the Barber, 240-687-7253.
A Squared Home and Office Solutions is the go-to source for home or office network and audiovisual solutions. We can help with smart home integration, wireless networking, media rooms, security systems, and more. We will link technology to your lifestyle seamlessly. Visit homeandofficesolutions.com for more info.